So today's question is, did you choose to vaccinate your children? With this episode being part of our Tough Topics series, please be respectful and kind in the comments. I think that all moms' perspectives are incredibly valid for your kids, your family. When I was kind of faced with this question as, a soon to be new mom, I was just trying to figure out where do I land on this subject? And I think having lots of different viewpoints can really helped me kind of figure out what were some variables that I didn't quite think about or know of. And I think that having lots of different perspectives for other moms that are trying to navigate this whole situation for themselves can be really valuable. If we haven't hung out before, my name is Brianna, and here on this channel we talk about money and mom life from moms for moms. But with that, let's go ahead and dive into today's tough topic. So when I was starting out looking into vaccines, I of course was pregnant, because at this point I didn't really need to know anything. I had no decision making that I was doing for anyone else. I was fully vaccinated as a child. Now granted, there were some vaccines that were not available when I was growing up, like the chickenpox vaccine that is available now. My mom purposefully put us together with another family in our neighborhood that had vaccines, or not vaccines, had the chickenpox, and we all drank out of everyone else's cup so that way we could get chickenpox so we weren't exposed to it later as an adult. Trying to make the right decision for my family and my, soon to be babies once I was pregnant I felt like there was this very big polar opposite of people that were super pro-vaccine and then people that were super anti-vaccine. And I was just how do I kind of navigate this whole conversation? Because it seems like there's very extreme viewpoints on either side. So one thing I did kind of take into consideration, and when I say I really mean my husband and I, because he was a very big part of this whole decision making for our family. One of his siblings actually had a really adverse reaction to their vaccine, and I don't know specifically which one. And so I was kind of talking with my mother-in-law about that experience to kind of see her viewpoint and her perspective and what she would have done differently if she was kind of sitting where I am now, making this decision for my new to be baby that was going to very, very soon be born. And that definitely played a big part in the decision that we made, because I think your whole family history really does need to be considered. Now, when it comes to this viewpoint of doctors, I think anytime you are speaking to a mass population of people about a specific topic, whether it's finance, whether it's health, whether it's, nutrition or exercise or whatever it is, there's going to be a very broad, big categories for the majority of people. But when you kind of reduce down to the individual person and their singular life, that's when things start to get very more you have caveats and nuances because of the things that are specific to that person. To just say sweeping across the board, don't use credit cards and credit cards are bad. And if you use a credit card, you're going to go in debt. Yeah, that's the majority of the problem for the vast majority of people, but that may not be one singular person's experience. You might be able to use credit cards very responsibly and very well. So to say all across the board, vaccines are good. Yeah, that's great for the large portion of the population. But when you get down to the singular person, maybe that's not the best decision for that one person, because you need to look at the variables of that individual person's life and circumstances. And I think as parents, that's ultimately what we're trying to do for our individual children. We're trying to make the best decision to protect them. And I think this is kind of why so many parents can butt heads about it, especially against the healthcare system, because the healthcare system is trying to give their expertise for the vast population. And then for us as parents, we're trying to make the best decision for our individual child based on our individual circumstances. And sometimes those different values and belief systems can really kind of be put against each other. And that's why there's this huge polarizing viewpoint on it all. So the first circumstance you'll probably bet with for making a decision for your child and vaccines are going to be right after you give birth. Now, you may as part of like your prenatal appointments, kind of go through this whole conversation with your doctor, and they may like recommend or have this conversation with you about having certain vaccines while you're still pregnant, so that way your baby can have certain immunity after your baby is born. The first thing that you're going to be faced with after your baby is born in the hospital, it's going to be like 2 vaccines and then like eye ointments, as far as like what people usually like consider to be vaccines. And for me specifically, we chose to decline all vaccines in the hospital except for vitamin K. And we chose to do vitamin K because we were weighing like the pros and cons, like the risks versus like the adverse effects of what that vaccine may end up posing. And some people have even kind of basically said like, well, the vitamin K shot isn't really a vaccine as far as like the true nature of it. I'm not a doctor. I'm not in the medical field. I'm just a mom. So I definitely recommend that you do your own research in regards to this whole conversation and topic. And so when we were in the hospital, we decided just to do the vitamin K. Now, my sons were delivered via C-section, so I didn't really necessarily, like, we didn't even have a conversation where our doctors or nurses were like kind of pushing or advocating for the eye drops or eye ointment, because they were delivered by a C-section and it wasn't really even like considered medically necessary. Now, I do have friends that have like completely gone like absolutely no vaccine for any of their children and any of their kids. And I've also have other friends that are like super pro-vaccine. So when I was kind of navigating this whole topic, a couple of the books that were recommended to me, as far as like some, like if you're interested in like just doing additional research and like considering, should I go vaccine? Should I not go do vaccine? Do I want to do a delayed schedule? I'll link them both up in the resources of this episode, but one of them is called The Vaccine Friendly Plan by Dr. Paul Safe. And then the other one is The Vaccine Book by Dr. Robert Sears. I think you could probably find at a local library, or you might be able to do a library loan if you don't want to like invest and buy them on your own. But they both do a really good job as far as like identifying like the medical side of the vaccines, and kind of helping you as a parent make an informed decision for your child and your child's medical history. Before I gave birth, I talked to a lot of other moms in my area, kind of just like still being very much in that like, okay, I'm not completely against vaccines. I'm kind of thinking that there may be some vaccines that we want to do, but maybe not others, or maybe we want to do a delayed schedule, and just like wanting to find a doctor that I knew that would like be open to those conversations with me, that I didn't feel like necessarily had a very big, like, you have to be vaccinated to even get service at this clinic, because I have had that experience, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so one of my friends actually referred us to a family doctor in the area, because their family wasn't at all vaccinated. And so I knew that I could go there and he would kind of be open to how we decided to move forward with our family. So in my conversation with him, this first appointment that we're having after my son is born, I told him basically like I am not super sure how I feel about vaccines, and maybe we want to do a delayed schedule, and kind of asking him his recommendation or his thoughts on vaccines at his clinic. He ended up saying that because I was nursing, that the antibodies in my breast milk would help protect my baby for a certain duration of time. And I can't specifically remember the duration that he told me, so definitely, have this conversation with your own pediatrician or do research that is medically based. Because like I said, I'm not a doctor, I'm just a mom. And since my son also was not in daycare, he was home with us, he also had a much significantly reduced risk associated with like the different things that he would be exposed to. So because of that, we ended up choosing to do a delayed schedule, and he had a discussion with me that he actually prefers to only give one vaccine at a time, and like not one vaccine, but like introducing one new vaccine at each appointment. So when we were ready to actually start vaccinating our son, he would say, okay, well, we're going to start with this vaccine, and he'll get the first shot, and then we'll see if there's a reaction based off of where that shot was, administered. And then at the next appointment, he would get maybe the second dose of that first shot, and then we would introduce one new shot to him. him. And he would so like most babies, they have their shots on their legs. And so he would put the shots in separate legs. So that way we would know, like, okay, if he has a reaction, we know which shot he's having the reaction to based off of where on his body he might develop a rash or hives or something like that. And because we're only introducing one new shot at every appointment, we have this duration of time where we can say, okay, was there an adverse reaction? How is he responding to the shot? And because we're doing these delayed introductions of these shots, if he administers the vaccine he got previously plus a new one and then he has a reaction, we know most likely that that is connected to the new vaccine that he just received because he didn't have a reaction to the previous one. So because we chose to go about it in this way, and because we were also doing a delayed schedule, that there would often be like a long duration of time between appointments and between shots being administered. So it came to the point where we decided to move out of state, and so we had to change pediatricians. Well, and again, we were with a family doctor, so I have heard some moms say that can make a difference, that family doctors may be more open to like varying schedules or choosing not to vaccinate versus a pediatrician's office. So since we're moving states, I had a friend in, the new location that we were moving to, and I was like, hey, do you have a pediatrician you recommend? Do you really love them? What's your experience? She's like, oh yeah, I really love this pediatrician. I went there for my first appointment, and at this point I had both of my sons. And at that appointment, it was really interesting because, of course, I'm having a conversation with them. The vaccines, of course, come up, and they basically told me at that appointment that in order to receive care at that clinic, then our kids had to be fully up to date on their vaccines, and that if we did not have them fully up to date by the next appointment, that they would not accept them as a patient. Because we were using such a delayed schedule, but to get them fully up to date by the recommended time frame and guidelines that they wanted them to be at by their next appointment, then that meant that one of my sons would have to have up to 5 or 6 shots at the next appointment. And I was just like, that's not happening. And I kind of walked out of there really feeling like almost like a third-class citizen. And I was just like, my mom brain was just like so surprised by the fact that like we could be denied medical care for our kids based off of the medical decision that we were making for the benefit of our child. And of course they asked me in our appointment, like, why are you making this decision for your children? Like, so they understood exactly what our thought process, what our logic was, what our concerns were, and yet they still chose to enforce this policy. Part of me understands where they're coming from because they are, a company, a corporation. They're, able to enforce their own policies and beliefs on whoever seeks service there. And if you don't like their policies and beliefs, then you seek service somewhere else. Like, I understand that point, but as a parent, that's like, okay, medical care is a necessity. Then it blows my mind that we could be denied medical care just because of our beliefs that we're trying to do for the best position of our children. And again, it's not like we weren't vaccinating. We just wanted to choose a different route for our children specifically based off of our concerns and what we felt was the best option for our children. Like if every single pediatric, hospital, every single doctor's office has this policy, then that basically means that anyone that chose not to maybe get a certain vaccine for their kids or choose not to vaccinate their kids, then they don't have an option of finding care anywhere else. If this is the standard of every single care facility in your area, and that just like made me incredibly sad and frustrated as a parent. I was just like, okay, so then we are denied care for our kids because we're trying to choose the best medical care for the history of our kids. I think that this conversation, even though I know it is very prevalent in our society, especially for parents going through and like grappling with this whole decision, yet I don't think that it is kind of discussed from all viewpoints in a very positive light, because like I said, like the medical profession is there making this sweeping generalization for the large majority of people. And yet, as parents, we're trying to make the very individual decision for the betterment and the health and safety of our individual child. And I think that this also can like feeling like this third class citizen can also translate very equally over to like daycare and school, because schools also can have this expectation, like if you're going to enroll your kid there, then they have to be fully vaccinated, just like with daycares. Like some daycares will not accept kids that are not fully vaccinated or fully up to a certain vaccine schedule. And are there medical exemptions? Yes. And some people have said like, okay, we'll just fill out the medical exemption form. It's not that hard. It's just one page, right? It's all very specific to your state. But, and I, granted, I've never gone through that process. So if you have, I would love for you to like chime in here and kind of let me know, like, how challenging is that? What has been your experience to filling out like a medical exemption or a religious exemption, for an example? But I do wonder, like, part of me, why I have never kind of gone that route is because, like, are there some vaccines that I morally are not okay with? Yes. But like that does not apply to every single vaccine. And I kind of question and I wonder, like, okay, for me to fill out a religious exemption, does that then mean like I have to have said and rejected all vaccines altogether? Like, and that doesn't seem like that's quite right either, because if I'm saying that I'm taking a religious exemption for my kids for one vaccine and yet I've vaccinated other ones, like, does that really then apply? So I'm curious to hear if you've had any experience with that. But back to this whole like feeling like a third class citizen is, okay, if you've decided that you are not vaccinating your kids because of a religious or medical concern that you have as a parent, and yet you're denied, care from a pediatrician's office, and you're denied like entry into school or entry into daycare, then what does that mean for like how you're able to provide and support your family, right? Like, not everyone can go out and hire a nanny to be able to bring into their home because their child isn't vaccinated and therefore isn't being accepted into daycare, right? Not everyone can afford to just stay home with their kids because their kids aren't vaccinated and therefore can't go into daycare, especially if you live in a more rural setting where you don't have access to a lot of daycares, or there are like every daycare has a waiting list, or maybe like you can't find like an in-home daycare of someone that you trust and feel comfortable leaving your kids with. And yet, like, we're, as parents, as moms, we're put in this really challenging position where medical facilities and daycares and schools have set the stipulation. And yet, if we don't feel like that's the right decision for our child, then we don't have other options for our child. And so we're forced into making this decision just so that way we have access to these societal norms to be able to take care of our family in other ways. Since we have chosen to vaccinate our kids outside of some exceptions, since we chose to go the more delayed route of vaccinating them, is as they got older and the vaccine appointments kind of ended up becoming a little bit more challenging, because like no kids like getting shots. Like, they're old enough after a certain point that, they're no longer a baby. They recognize when they're getting a shot, and there's the wiggling and the writhing, and they're scared and they're in pain. And of course, nobody likes getting shots. I'm an adult and I don't like getting a shot. Recognizing that this was going to be a challenge if we decided to go this route, one of the things that we ended up doing in our area is we would go to their doctor appointments for their wellness visits. And I wanted to make sure that like so much cooperation was needed from them for these appointments to go smoothly and to go well. I didn't want those types of visits to then be associated in their brain with all of this anxiety and fear, because they're showing up to the same location as where they're having their vaccines at. And just like in the back of their mind, they're like having this like dreading, feeling, knowing that they're going to have a shot, because that has been the thing that has happened at every other one of their appointments. So what we decided to do is we decided to take them to our health department to have their vaccines, because then even though they're associating our visits to the health department with a vaccine, it's a much shorter visit, and the time frame that we're there is much more condensed. And for some parents, you may also find that based off of like whatever insurance you have or like what benefits or programs you have available, you might actually have a significantly reduced fee to have them vaccinated at your health department versus through your pediatrician's office. Ended up working out really well because after, once you get poked once, like, you already have that pain reaction experience. So I just didn't want them to get poked so many times at their appointments just to get these shots administered. And then I wanted to like give them I immediately wanted to reinforce their like positive behavior after they were at our, after they got a shot. So prior to them going in for their appointment, we had like a doctor bag, and I keep this for all of their appointments. So they get to pick out like an inside of them. Since I have boys, they're all Matchbox cars, and there's like different varieties, and so they'll pick out a car that they want and they'll carry it into their appointment. And then after their shot is administered, we immediately open up the car and I'm congratulating them and saying like, wow, isn't your car so cool? And you did such a good job, and that, like, do you want to play with your car? So trying to like immediately take their focus off of the pain that they're experiencing in their leg or their arm or wherever they got their shot at. So that way they're not fixated on the shot that they just had. I'm very happy with how we've kind of gone about choosing this option for our family. And thankfully so far we have not had any negative medical reactions, but definitely having this concern on my husband's side of, his family's history with, medical complications to vaccines. It has been something that I have been more cautious about going forward, and like making sure that we feel very comfortable and confident in the decisions that we're making for our kids and for their medical health and safety, and for like taking into the consideration of like our pediatrician and their medical background and their experience, but then also as parents trying to educate ourselves as much as possible to like what makes sense for us based off of our moral concerns, medical history, all of those factors all combined into deciding what is the best decision for our individual child. And I also, as a parent, even though we were planning to homeschool and we have been homeschooling, I also knew like, okay, if there was ever a situation where we needed to put them in public school, I didn't want them to be so far behind that it was just like, okay, we haven't vaccinated them at all. And then all of a sudden, circumstances in our life means that they need to go to public school, or we feel like that's the best situation for them to be enrolled in school. And then all of a sudden they, are addressed with needing a whole bunch of these vaccines all at once just to be able to get enrolled. I didn't really want to kind of be faced with that obstacle should we ever find ourselves in that situation. So that was also a factor too. But I would really love to hear your perspective or your experience on vaccines and like the decision that you're making for your family. And again, like, I think that every parents and every mom's viewpoint is valid, and that let's just like have this really constructive conversation in the comments versus like a super polarizing experience. So yeah, I would love to continue the conversation down there, but until we hang out again, I hope you create a home your heart loves.